Good evening. Now it's the turn of the northwest of England to feel the full force of the storms battering Britain. The Met Office has issued a red alert, meaning a danger to life, as rain and hurricane-force winds are lashing the northwest coast tonight. It's playing havoc with transport links, with the M6 closed, Crewe station evacuated, some rail lines suspended, and thousands of passengers stuck on trains. Winds of over 100 miles an hour began earlier today in the southwest. You can see it here on the satellite image. The weather system working its way up through Wales and the West Midlands. 125,000 homes are now without power, and a man has died in Wiltshire. It's believed he was electrocuted while trying to move a tree brought down by power cables. Our first report tonight from Judith Moritz, who's live for us in Blackpool. Judith, how bad is it there?
It's still extremely windy here. The high winds were forecast to arrive along this stretch of coastline at about 2 o'clock this afternoon, and right on cue they arrived, slamming into the seafront, and they've been ripping through Blackpool all afternoon. They're starting to drop just slightly, it feels to me, but it's still very difficult here. And as you can see behind me, the seafront here at Blackpool has now been closed because parts of it are just too dangerous for people to walk along. And it's not just been in Blackpool, but there's been disruption, delay and dismay across the whole of the northwest of England. In Blackpool, they live for the summer season. Today, though, the resort bore the brunt of winter. Glamorous it wasn't. The promenade was battered and bruised by extraordinary high winds. Firefighters have been working at full stretch, trying to keep up with demand. As emergency calls surged, they opened an extra call centre to cope.
Currently, the signage being ripped down, chimney stacks, roofs being torn away from buildings. And firefighters just generally assisting the members of the public that are in need at this moment in time.
Blackpool had been forecast winds of up to 100 miles an hour, and the conditions worsened steadily throughout the day. It's now just after 7:30 and the wind is continuing to pick up speed, with signs and debris now blowing across the roads. Some emergency workers have said to me they may still have to close the whole of the Blackpool promenade. A short time later, the road was closed and traffic diverted. Elsewhere, the wind caused damage and disruption on the roads. Mercifully, the driver of this car in South Manchester wasn't in the vehicle when it was crushed. The M62 motorway was closed to high-sided vehicles, this lorry getting into trouble on the Trans-Pennine route. And there was significant disruption on the railways, with cancellations on the West Coast Main Line and Crewe station evacuated due to building damage. Passengers were taken to a nearby hotel.
Going back to Warrington, not very happy at the moment, got nowhere to stay.
Basically, we've been waiting for the train for quite a long time now. We might be getting home 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, we don't know what time we're getting home.
Tonight, residents at a block of flats in Old Trafford are stranded after the building's only staircase collapsed.
There was an almighty crash and then a whole load of shouting outside, so I ran out the front door to go and have a look, and the stairs just completely disappeared, and my car was actually parked underneath them, and it's now a complete write-off.
At Goodison Park, Everton's match against Crystal Palace was cancelled, as was the Manchester City-Sunderland game. The high winds disrupting the days of many thousands of people across northwest England. Judith Moritz, BBC News, Blackpool.
Well, the southwest of England and Wales took the brunt of the storms earlier today with record winds. Almost a month's rainfall is expected to fall by Friday. The Assistant Chief of the Defence Staff said the UK is facing an almost unparalleled natural crisis. Well, Hal Griffiths is in Criccieth in North Wales for us tonight. What's the situation there, Hal?
Well, finally the wind speeds are starting to drop, but this whole coastline has spent the whole day on red alert. Just a few miles up the Llŷn Peninsula, wind speeds recorded of 108 miles per hour. Everyone I've spoken today has said one thing over and over. They have never seen conditions like this on Britain's shorelines. An offer of military assistance has been made to Wales, and while things are starting to calm down, it may take daylight to really show the scale of the destruction caused. What will nature throw at us next? As hurricane conditions reached West Wales, they triggered sandstorms and carried heavy rain, leaving nowhere to hide.
I'm over 60 years old. I haven't seen anything like this, like it's been since Christmas. We haven't had a break-up, really. It's been day after day.
Dozens of schools were forced to close their doors. Few wanted to hang around to see what would happen.
Horrendous, it's the worst weather I've ever worked in. It's really bad. The 3 o'clock children have gone home and they were coming out crying, the sand was hurting them.
John Dunn decided to evacuate his home. The caravans on the site he runs at risk have been blown away.
It feels as though I'm in the middle of a nightmare and somebody's going to pinch me and wake me up. But I know that's not going to happen. This is how it is.
The gales have now started hitting the coastline. These wind speeds would be considered extraordinary out on the open sea. But what makes it exceptional is they're hitting inland. The result was fallen trees and mangled power lines, leaving nearly 100,000 properties across Wales, the southwest and the Midlands without power. These exceptional conditions have swept around Britain's coastline. At Lyme Regis, the waves grew with every hour. Over in Ireland, Limerick Boathouse stripped of its roof. Once again, emergency teams have been tested. This driver had to be rescued from the River Wye. In Wiltshire, a man died after a tree brought down power cables. Forecasters say the winds will subside overnight, but Britain's wild winter just seems to rage on. Howell Griffith, BBC News, Crickeith.
Well, as we've seen, the storm is bringing a deluge of rain with it. Today, the Prime Minister repeated his pledge that no expense will be spared to help flooded communities get back on their feet. He said £5,000 will be available for businesses and homeowners to protect their properties in the future. There'll be a £10 million fund for farmers, and businesses could qualify for 100% rate relief for 3 months. Robert Hall has been assessing the extent of the damage across southern England and how the armed forces and emergency services are coming together to help.
Stormy skies and another city under threat. The peaceful waters of the River Itchen have become a torrent, and historic Winchester is preparing to defend itself. But extra sandbags and help from the Navy will not be enough to protect nearby homes. River keeper Miles Gascoigne and his neighbours had taken matters into their own hands.
We can look after ourselves. We've got a fireman, a builder and a river keeper in the street, and you kind of deal with water and sand and stuff all the time anyway.
Even before this latest storm, the River Itchen is carrying 15 tonnes of water every second. It travels through the centre of Winchester, and beneath that, the ancient watermill. If this channel gets blocked or overwhelmed, the river will have nowhere to go. So the Environment Agency is creating a flood north of the city, forcing the Itchen onto farmland with an artificial weir.
There's an awful lot of floodplain available in the fields here, and so that will flood first, and our engineers are monitoring this to make sure that we're not going to increase flood risk upstream.
Particularly on the Thames.
The Prime Minister, who chaired 2 meetings of the COBRA Emergency Planning Group today, told Parliament that he stood by his pledge that money would be no object in the relief effort, but he warned that a further 1,000 homes were at risk. Away from Whitehall, the water was creeping up £10 million worth of barriers in Bewdley. The River Severn in Worcestershire last peaked at this level 14 years ago, and it hasn't finished rising yet. Worcester's defences were breached. More than 50 people had to be evacuated from this sheltered housing complex. The Thames Valley remains a landscape of muddy water and ruined homes. The Army, emergency services and volunteers have been working to reassure and respond to fresh calls for help.
Well, the Windsor one there, that one now has been done.
At Gold Command in Oxford, the rehearsals have proved their worth. But this emergency is unprecedented and relentless.
We're working long hours and we're all working very hard, but considering what the members of the public are going through in terms of the flooding issue that they're facing, that's the least we can be doing.
Tonight, Wraysbury in the Thames Valley saw reinforcements from London's fire brigade. The legacy of another storm is travelling downstream. Along our swollen rivers, this miserable winter story seems unending. Robert Hall, BBC News.
So what's been causing the exceptional and prolonged rain and winds battering so much of the UK? Our science editor, David Shukman, explains.
Violent swirls of storms pictured from space. Britain is in the top right corner. You can sometimes make it out through the clouds. These satellite images gathered over the past fortnight show a conveyor belt of weather systems. So what's behind this barrage of bad weather? Bizarrely, the story begins in Southeast Asia, with dark clouds over Indonesia. Heavy rain and massive flooding were part of an unusual weather pattern that sent ripples through the atmosphere halfway round the world. The best explanation from the Met Office is that there's been a kind of weather chain reaction. That heavy rainfall in Indonesia disrupted the jet stream which races over the Pacific Ocean. In turn, this bend in the jet stream far in the north diverted it over North America. This helped to create the conditions for the so-called polar vortex. That led to extreme cold, producing extraordinary scenes like these in many parts of the United States. And it's thought that what happened there had an influence ultimately on us. That's because the pattern of the weather in America affected the course of the Atlantic jet stream. It's been flowing unusually rapidly and driving storm after storm our way.
The British don't control their own weather, and it's part of the whole global system. And we sit at the end of the Atlantic storm track. And so we might be aware that these storms tend to come from the west over the Atlantic, but they don't just start there. The whole thing is part of this global system.
So what about a possible influence from us, from the greenhouse gases that belch out from chimneys? Could man-made climate change be making the weather more violent? Researchers say there are some signs that global warming may be involved. The waters of the Atlantic are warmer than they've been for 60 years. That heats the air and lets it hold more moisture. And the number of intense Atlantic storms has been rising over the past century. But working out a human influence is very difficult. Met Office scientists cannot give a definitive answer about climate change, but they ask about all the recent extremes.
Is this what we're going to be facing in the future? The indications are that our weather will become more variable, more volatile if you like, and therefore how we adapt to that is going to be very critical.
The Met Office itself was blasted by gales today. The question is whether global warming will make scenes like this more likely, something scientists are desperate to answer. David Shukman, BBC News.
And you can get all the latest on the severe weather and the flooding on the BBC News website. That's bbc.co.uk/news. And there are, of course, updates on your BBC local radio and TV stations. The BBC